Hey, everybody. Welcome to another heart-centered conversation on Bound by Grace podcast, where healing begins with honesty. Today, we're honored to sit down with Jay Miller, the passionate and purpose-driven host of Unfeigned Podcast. On his platform, Jay vulnerably shares his own journey of brokenness, restoration, and the pursuit of relational health. And in doing so, helps countless others begin their own process of healing. In this episode, we're digging into a principle that shapes the way we live and love. Whatever you give your attention to, you will become attracted to. And whatever you become attracted to, you will pursue. From emotional patterns to spiritual connections, this truth holds power over the directions we take in our relationships, our habits, and even our sense of purpose. This isn't just theory. It's a wake-up call to examine what's shaping our desires and driving our decisions. Jay brings wisdom, authenticity, and a whole lot of grace to this dialogue. And we promise it's going to speak to something deep inside you. Get ready for a conversation that will stir your heart, sharpen your focus, and maybe even shift the way you pursue things in your own life. So how are we doing today? I'm so happy you're on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here.
Good. So we're going to try and not focus on a Q&A style. This is for our listeners. But we do have a question to kind of get us started, and then hopefully everything just kind of flows from there, since this is something you're pretty passionate about. So I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge on it.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I guess, what does it look like to intentionally redirect your attention when you realize you're being drawn towards something unhealthy?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah. So I want to start by saying sometimes we don't realize the power that's in whatever we give our attention to. And so I'll give a bit of a backstory quick. And this will sort of lead into the answer of that. So my journey my story starts long before 2016, but my healing journey really started in 2016. And for a long time, a big part of my life, my attention was being given to addiction and chasing like this, the applause, I call it, where I had to constantly be affirmed. And so all of my attention went towards those things. In 2016, it started to go through a divorce. And after a divorce, I'll give you a real quick backstory. So my healing journey has involved in a divorce. I was homeless for a year and a half. I was falsely arrested and put in prison, or put in jail, lost everything. And so during that time, while it was very painful, big struggle, I realized something where I was giving all of my attention to those circumstances. And so when I felt alone or hopeless, my attention was being given to the addiction to coke. And the more I gave my attention to that, the more it became attractive, because it gave me this false sense of hope or security or control. And so as my life felt like it was out of control, I continued to give my attention to things that numbed it for a bit. And the more I gave attention to it, the more I became attracted to it. And that's what I pursued. So there was a point over the next few years after 2016, there was a point where I felt the lowest I've ever felt. It was the darkest place of my life. I felt hopeless. And I remember surrendering everything. And faith had always been a big part of my life, but I never really gave too much attention to it. I never considered it. And I never really owned it. And at this point, I kind of just surrendered my situation, surrendered everything. And I realized really quickly that I had to do something different, or I was going to fall back into these my toxic behaviors, my patterns. And I started to try to focus on things differently. And so instead of focusing on my situation, I focused on something that I could do positive for that day. And it started out really small, like little baby steps. It might be just trying to help somebody, or it might just be focusing my attention on something good that's happening around me instead of the bleak situation that I was in. And I realized really quickly that it started to work. It It changed my mood. And then so from those little things, I started to give my attention to my healing. What I noticed was if I focused on being homeless, I, instead of focusing on it being a beautiful day, and I know that might sound silly, but something as little as just focusing on being able to breathe, having another day. And I started to realize that my mindset started to change, my attitude started to change, and I actually felt like doing things. I didn't feel like being stuck. So it was a long process, but over that process, I started to give my attention to my healing. And what that looked like was I had to go all the way back, and I had to start asking why. I thought I would never be different. I thought I would never heal. I thought I would never change. And so I started to ask myself these questions like, why am I like this? Why do I do the things I did? Why do I behave this way? And started to give my attention to those things. And as I would discover something, I would literally just consider the opposite. And so if it was an addictive behavior and I figured out why I would go to that, I would start giving my attention to the opposite. And I would replace that addiction or that coping mechanism. I would replace it with something positive, which at the time was a lot of prayer and positive mindset and reaffirming who I knew I was, but kind of lost that. And as I gave my attention to that, it became very attractive. I became attracted to it because I felt myself believing I am this or I am this, and I wanted more of that. So I continued to give more attention to that and just became really attractive. And so that's what I began pursuing. And over time, I was able to heal from my addiction, heal from homelessness, heal from my broken relationship. So long and painful process, but what I gave my attention to carried so much power I didn't even realize.
Yeah, I can attest to that. And there's science behind that as well. We're kind of blind to the things that aren't in our everyday sights. And so for someone that's in a toxic cycle, they're used to seeing that. So that's their comfort. That's what their attention goes to. That's what they seek out without even realizing it. And it's because we don't like being uncomfortable. So you have to purposely start to pay attention to positive things. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like it rewires your brain to begin to think in positive ways. Like during COVID, I was watching the news a lot.
Okay.
I thought I was staying informed. It made me think so negatively, and I started feeling depressed. Because it was when the George Floyd stuff started happening.
Oh, yeah.
And I had friends on Facebook come on, and they would say things that I don't remember that being like an issue when we were in high school together. So I literally had to get off and start like listening to K-Love and stuff like that, just to get my mind to be more positive, because it stole my energy.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I was in a bad place.
Yeah.
So I completely understand.
Yeah, and we have. I love that you mentioned music, like the radio station. That was something that I started to. Not that I don't think I really wanted to so much just listen to music, but I just thought because of the state I was in, I had to change my mindset. I had to change where my attention was, and I just thought there are so many songs that I would feel encouraged from, and there were songs that I would play on repeat just over and over and over. And it helped me get to this mindset of just, encouraged, or this positive mind frame. And it really did help. So music played a big part. But I did want to say something, because we get stuck, and all of us have, we all sometimes will say, oh, you're so hard on yourself, or I'm my biggest critic, that kind of thing. We all have this inner critic. And so a lot of times we give our attention to that when we're telling ourselves, it's hopeless, or you're worthless, or whatever it is, speaking into that situation. And we give our attention to that. And then that becomes what we become attracted to, because like you said, it's comfortable. It becomes comfortable. We know it. For me, my addiction, it was a sexual addiction. And when my life felt chaotic, my inner critic would say, yeah, but this will give you control. This is, your life is so out of control here. This gives you some semblance of control. And because I wanted that in my life, I started to give my attention to that. And it was very temporary, and it did more damage, obviously, than good. But I gave my attention to my inner critic, and I started to convince myself, oh yeah, that's right. And I had to really work really purposefully against that. When I started to change my mind, I would still, all that same stuff would still creep up, and I would still, I would still tell myself, your life's out of control. This will give you control. And I would purposely have to, fight against that. And it was a mental battle, but there was so much power on either end. If you give into that negativity and that toxic environment, you're going to become attracted to it, and you're going to pursue it because it's going to give you some false sense of whatever it is, hope, security. And it wasn't until I started to battle that and change my mind that things, and it's, I know this sounds funny, but it really does. There's such power, and it really does shift. It shifts things in your life. And you mentioned rewiring your brain. Sometimes I talk about, what we focus on, that's what we'll go after. It's the same concept. And, the kind of manifest it, that people talk about. And so, but it really does. When you start giving your attention to these positive things, you find that positive things start to happen.
Yes.
And it sounds crazy, but it really, it's true. And there's so much power in that. And I learned that in my relationship too. My life before, I often talk about being in my healed version and walking in my healed version now. I'm very different now, but a lot of these toxic behaviors and the things I was giving my attention to led to the breakdown of my marriage. And I was able to heal from that. And I learned that in relationships, it's so true when you talk about the kind of relationship you want to have, right? And so every day, if you wake up and you say, how can I serve my partner? That's the things you're going to pursue. And you're gonna end up serving that person because that's what you're giving your attention to. Where, the flip side of that coin is, how can I serve myself? And you give your attention to that. And then, I had to learn that the hard way, but it really is. There's so much power in our attention and what we focus on. And really what we focus on, that's where we move. That's what we'll move towards.
Yeah. You talk about the inner critic. I think a lot of people listen to that inner critic and feel unworthy. And just an example, for the longest time, I felt unworthy of certain pay in my job. I felt like imposter syndrome. And even though the position I was getting, they said I was fully qualified for, when they asked me what I wanted for pay, I completely lowballed myself.
Yeah.
And then I look and see what the average pay is, and I was much lower. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like,
Right.
why don't I think that I am worth what everyone else is getting paid when I know I do the job better?
Yep.
So I had to retrain myself to get uncomfortable and ask for more pay.
Yeah. And it really, you would think that, when someone would come to me and say, hey, you're not this, or you're this. And it's almost like I knew it was true, but for some reason I didn't believe it. And like you're saying, so this, my inner critic would tell me a lot that I'm not worth it, that I wasn't worth this, or, I wasn't qualified to do this because of what I did in my past. And so then when I would pursue opportunities, there were a lot of opportunities that I just gave up on because I was like, well, I'm not worthy to do that, or, I can't do that because I'm disqualified. And it's that, again, it really is that inner critic, and you start to believe it. And it's a real process of changing your mind. And when you're stuck, and I would encourage anybody who's listening, when you're stuck in that situation or whatever the situation is, and you're hearing those kinds of things and you're wondering like, why, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I doing this? As you change your mind, that's like the beginning of healing, when you can shift your attention. But those things, they still come up. I still battle with that. I still deal with my inner critic saying, hey, do you remember? And, did you forget you used to do this? And the big difference now is since I've been putting my attention towards my healing and the direction I want to go, I'm not a slave to those things anymore. Where before those were, unhealthy coping mechanisms. Now I understand I don't have to do that. I don't have to give into that. And it's because of this mindset shift that I worked hard on it. It didn't happen overnight. And I had to go through a lot of things, but yeah, it really, there's such power in where we give our attention. And it really applies to everything. And not just, my story is different than your story, and we all have unique stories. And I may have went through something horrendous. Somebody else may have went through something way worse. It could just be in a relationship with a coworker, or, what you want to do, pursuing a job. But it's this mindset, that attention, and what you give that to, and what you become attracted to, and then what you pursue. There's such power in that, even in, little things, not just the suffering type, things. So.
Yeah, my sister had one of her employees. He was always in a bad mood, even though she liked him. He was just always in this pessimistic, just bad mood. And come to find out, and this situation. This does not mean that it's one of our listeners' situations. I'm using it as an example. Please don't get offended. But he was listening to heavy metal. And it was like really hate kind of heavy metal, because I get that there's positive heavy metal, but this particular one was more on the negative side. And that was almost his identity. Like, that's what he liked. That's what he did. He did it for years. And my sister was like, listening to stuff like that on a constant basis can really get in your head, and it can change your emotions. Do me a favor and do a challenge where you listen to uplifting, non-heavy metal for 1 week.
Yeah.
And she said that he was like, that's not going to do anything. He did it for 3 days, and there was a difference in his whole attitude at work.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And we don't think about that. We think something like movies or, music, or even, especially now with social media, we don't really think it's going to affect us on that kind of level, but it just happens so subtle. The more you give your attention to that, it will determine kind of the direction that you go. And if you're always hearing negativity, even with situations that happen to you, sometimes you see people that have dire circumstances, like they have a terminal illness, and their spirit is so encouraging, and you're like, how can they deal with that so positively when they have such a crazy circumstance? And it's most of the time it's what they're giving their attention to. And if you're just kind of fed with this negativity and woe is me kind of thing, I used to ask, like I said, I always had faith. Faith has become very much more important in my life now. But I used to ask God, like, why, right? I would always say, why is this happening? Why are you doing this? Why me? All that kind of stuff. The one thing that changed when I started to change my mind was, and I know this is cliche, I'm not real big into cliches, but I started to say, like, why not me? Right. So instead of this is happening to me, God must be building me for something, right? He must be preparing me for something. I don't know what it is. I haven't fully realized, and I probably, I'm still being built into his image, but he's building me for something. And so instead of, I can't believe I went through all this was so bad, and that, that Eeyore type mentality, it's that, whatever that was, whatever the reason was preparing me for something, that he has. And I'll realize it someday. And that positivity shapes your direction. And, as you're thinking negative, feeding with music, what you're watching, the social media, you tend to become depressed and anxious, and all these negative kind of things really start to bombard you because you're just feeding that, into your mind. And so it's just a simple mindset shift that can change that.
Yeah. We got orders to Hawaii, which is where I am now. And of course, that's a long plane ride. And I've never been afraid of flying. And then all of a sudden, about 2 weeks before we were due to leave, I got bombarded with all of my social media showing me clips of plane crashes.
Oh my word.
I was so anxious coming here.
Oh my word.
So I really do understand that what I give my attention to, it matters so much. So for anyone listening, what you really need to do is evaluate what type of person you want to be. Do you want to be happy? Do you want to be Christ-like? Do you want to have that close relationship with God? Do you want that job? If you're looking to get married and you're not dating anyone, kind of think about what that person looks like. Start to give your attention to those things that you really want to have in your life. And this is basically like manifestation, but I don't quite believe in that. I think that there is a definite science behind it. It's like going on the lot, buying a yellow truck because you think that that's nothing anyone else has, and then you get on the highway and you see 10 yellow trucks. So it's really opening up just a different mindset and a different lens. And allowing yourself to grow in that uncomfortableness, because it will be uncomfortable when you start. It's something you're not used to. We like comfort. We're just built that way. But it is important to grow and to change, to start to really give your attention to that. So as an example, if you're wanting a close relationship with God and you read your Bible and you're trying to think, and you pray, but you're trying to think, why does God feel so far away? I think that other things that you can do in that aspect is you can listen to Christian music. You can listen to Christian podcasts. When you're on social media, try and get the algorithm to change by searching Christian reels. And then your algorithm will slowly change to God-like content. And that will make you feel a lot better and a lot stronger in your walk with God.
Yeah. And it's about being intentional. So there's a lot of times we want to go, this is for me. A lot of times when I say I'm really speaking from my story, but I wanted to go from broken to healed. I didn't want to be this way. I want to be this way. And when most often I wasn't very intentional. I just wanted to be from here to here overnight. But I learned it took very intentional steps. And what I would get caught up on sometimes was like the big deal. I'm in this circumstance and it seems so overwhelming, so heavy. How can I ever get out of it? And so I just don't do anything. I won't, it's so bad. I'm not going to take any small steps. I'm just going to sit here. And what I learned was it's just, being very intentional over these small little things. Like you said, listening to Christian music. That's something super simple that anyone can do. And it's a small step, but it's a huge impact. Since you mentioned relationships and finding somebody you might want to marry. And after my divorce, my world was turned upside down. And I thought I would never, ever be able to love someone again. I would never be able to be loved. And I was just in this really dark place. When I started to come out of this, and I started to heal from that mindset, and I made a list. And because I thought, I want to find somebody that I can fully love. And I want to find somebody that can fully love me. Now, if God allows that to happen in my life, but I just wanted it. I just wanted to be there. And I thought, wait, you know what? I'm going to start to give my attention to this. So I made a list, and it was very, very detailed. Some of it was super silly, but I made this list, and I just kept saying, God, your will, not mine, but I'm just spilling my heart out. And here's what I would really love to find in someone. And here's what I would really love for someone to find in me, and all these kinds of things. I made this list, and you really do start to, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or a work relationship, you really start to find that things on that list start to get checked off. And because it's these small little steps that you're putting your attention to, and before you know it, you've taken so many of these small little steps that you're now so far along on your healing journey. But it really is being intentional about these small little things. The music you listen to. I love the social media thing that you just said. I didn't even think of that, is searching for Christian things and trying to, change the algorithm. I love that. And that's something simple, but it's a huge impact. I love that.
Yeah, it really is a huge impact. I noticed a difference in the way I started to think about God on a more constant basis, having that algorithm changed, because it used to be like thirst traps or random funny videos. Some were videos I didn't even like and couldn't figure out why they were even on my feed.
Right.
So I started to search for certain things and then like the ones that really talk to me. And then my algorithm is now all of this like godly stuff or science-based stuff. And I enjoy that kind of content.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And you also said something else that was key. We talk a lot about attention, but you said you have to decide who you want to be, the kind of person you want to be. And that's really where it starts, right? You have to make that, you have to choose, I want to be this person, right? I don't want to be this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore, whatever it is. And I want to do this in this situation, or I want to be this person. And that choice is key, because if you are willing to make a choice, then you can start to put your attention to it. I have 3 kids, and I do a lot of sports training. And so I train all my kids. And so when they would come to me and say, Dad, I want to do this, or I want to make this team, or I want to be this, or I would say, okay, since you're telling me that, this is what we're going to do. We'll get you there. But if you're saying I want to do this, right, but you don't take these steps, if you're not willing to put in this kind of work to get there, then you really don't want that. You just like the idea of it, right? And so, and I would say that to them all the time. I say that to a lot of athletes, but it's the same with this, right? I don't want to be addicted to this anymore. If I really don't want to be addicted to it, I have to make that choice. And then it's going to be a daily, every moment of every day is shifting your attention. And if you really want to be healed from something like that, or a broken relationship, or just personally, it can happen. And it starts with that choice of saying, yeah, I really want this. And now you're just committing to do whatever it takes. Small little steps. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not easy, like you said. And you may not make those changes right away, right? So it starts with these little changes. And if you falter, so what? Get back up and try again. We're only human. We're not perfect. And when we make habits, those are hard to break. And it's not like you're going to have these habits that you can just walk away from and never look back. Sometimes they do creep back in your life.
Absolutely.
You just have to recognize it and try again. So it is a conscious effort. You have to be mindful and realize that just because you faltered doesn't make you a failure.
Right. It just makes you human.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that, because a lot of times we think of, like, if we're healed, or if we get better from something, or that now we're never going to encounter any of that stuff again. And if we do, that must mean we're not healed. That must mean we're still broken. But like you said, those things are going to happen, because that's life. Life will just always life. It's always lifing. It'll never stop lifing. But just because we encounter those same things, I from time to time when I get to a place where, because of the divorce, and we co-parent, and it's great. The hard thing though is when we have to take the kids back to the other person, right? So it's hard for my ex-wife because she wants to be with them. It's hard for me because I want to be with them. And so when it's those times where it's hard and I start to feel like, man, this really stinks. Like, I just don't like this. And then I start to remember, what my choices led to the broken marriage. And then I start to, and all this stuff starts to come back up, all the shame, the regret, the guilt, all of these things. And I used to just feel like that's what I'm going to be forever. But because I feel that stuff, that's natural. I'm just human. But now, like you said, I can recognize it. And that doesn't mean I'm not healed. That doesn't mean I'm still broken and I still have to fall prey to those things. And, but I still hear all of that. I'm still attacked, from those things, but now it's very different in how I handle it or how I respond. And, but I constantly talk to myself, reminding me that we're just human. We're going to mess up sometimes. And like you said, it's take one step back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps, so yeah, it is definitely that kind of process.
Yeah. And for the spiritual side of it, we like to think that some of it is the enemy kind of moving in and whispering to us, you should feel ashamed.
Yeah.
You should feel this. You should feel that. And that's going to happen because he sees you getting better.
Yes.
And that's not what he wants.
Right.
He wants you to think on that shame. He wants you to be depressed. He wants you back in those negative cycles. So you have to guard yourself and your heart and your mind and just retrain yourself. Yes,
absolutely. And even if like I said, my relationship with Christ is important. Faith is important. And I often say that even if faith is not an important part of your life, whether I like it or not, or whether you like it or not, that's not what makes it true, right? It's true because it's true. And it's happening all around us. And if the enemy can just convince us, just a little bit, convince us that, hey, do you remember like that? You can't do that because of this. If he can convince us a little bit, that shifts our attention back to that negative, and then we get back into that cycle. And I have a lot of friends that I'll talk to that faith isn't really a part of their life, but they're looking for a way to get out of this brokenness, or when something happens, they'll never turn away me praying for them or, encouraging them somehow. And I'm always telling them, like, listen, when it gets there, say a small little prayer, just pour your heart out. Just say, God, I don't know what to do. Or I feel like I'm out of control. Help me. And whether faith is important or not, I always tell people, it's not like Jesus is way over there in the corner and he's just kind of waiting there for us to come to him and be perfect and clean up our act and go to him. He's in it with us. He's there, right there in our brokenness, in our situations. And really it's just about leaning into him. And he's there for us. And it's very real, especially when you start to heal, because Satan does not want us to heal. He wants us to stay broken. And when you start to heal in little things, big things, and God, the way that God has designed you is starting to be realized in some things, that's when it gets the worst. For me, at least, that's when it got the worst.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you're trying to heal, when you're trying to lean into God, you're changing where your attention lies. So he wants to gain your attention back.
Yep.
So that spiritual attack is definitely going to be worse than when you aren't leaning into God, when you aren't trying to heal, when you're just sitting in your pain or your toxic cycles. He doesn't need to attack you. You're already where he wants you.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And it's sometimes I would get discouraged because I would think, man, like, I'm just exhausted. Like what else can I go through? Right. But something's being built in me each of those situations I went through. And the moment I would realize that, the moment I felt like, oh, okay, God is building something into me, I would be attacked. That is when I would feel it the most, to kind of get back into my old habits or my old ways. And the fight became even that much greater during those times where I realized, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. And then all of a sudden I was bombarded. And it's funny how things in life will come at you that will kind of pull you to those old ways during those times where you're like, okay, I want to heal. I want to be better. Or I want to turn to God. I want to start reading my Bible. I want to go to church. And then all of a sudden these things start coming into your life where you're like, wait a second, this is totally trying to distract me from what God's trying to do. So I know I felt like that, at least. Mm-hmm. I'm sure.
Absolutely. Even my co-host, she's not able to be on more than half the time now, because since we started this podcast, she's been under major spiritual attack in her home, in her marriage. And I think it's because the devil sees her potential and what she can bring. And he's like, I'm not going to allow that. So she needs to get it, put him under her thumb and get him out of her house. And it isn't that easy when you're going through it and you're exhausted and all you're thinking is negative things. And you have to remember that you're going to have to take authority in prayer, and you're going to have to rebuke him. And that might be multiple rebukes, but you do need to do it in order to continue on the path that God has set for you, because God is calling you to greatness. God is calling for everything that you've done in your life, including the bad, to be called for his glory.
Absolutely.
So I do think that spiritual attack is very real. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I agree.
Let me see here. I also wanted to ask you how hosting your podcast deepens your understanding of these dynamics.
Yeah. So when I was going through all of that stuff, people had always encouraged me throughout my life, to journal. And I never was somebody who journaled. I tried from time to time, but when I really started going through all of the things that I went through during that period from 2016 till just recently, the only thing that I could think to do was to record myself. And during my time of healing, I had people come and go every now and again, but I learned the hard way of how to come out of some things. And so I healed. As far as my healing is concerned, I did that on my own, and it was hard. And I did have people come in here and there, but there wasn't someone walking with me alongside me. And so I recorded over 100 episodes of, it wasn't ever intended to be a podcast at that point, but I recorded myself over 100 times, and it was very raw, and it was very unedited and unscripted. And it was just me laying all my emotions out. And the only thing I knew how to do was to record it. And I never intended it to become a podcast, because for me, it was therapeutic. And at that time in my life, I didn't want to go to see a therapist. I felt like I was too broken, and there was some other guilt and shame things going on. And so for me, recording myself was my way to get all my emotions out and talk through it. And it was never intended to be a podcast. Well, after I walked into my healing and started to heal from all these things, and in January of this year, I was being encouraged to tell my story. And at that point, I'm like, well, I'm nothing special. Who's gonna listen? People that know me, especially from back then, are they gonna think I'm a hypocrite? Now that I'm talking about being healed. And so I just was like, I don't know. And they kept saying, tell your story. Someone might be encouraged by your story. Like, someone needs to hear what you went through. And so I was like, well, I don't really know how to tell. And so they said, well, you should do a podcast. And I was like, well, I don't know, because at that time I thought, well, that's not for me. Like, important people do that, right? People that, who am I? Like, I'm not going to do a podcast. And so in February, I was like, okay, whatever, I'll do it. I didn't, and I didn't realize at the time, but looking back, I was being nudged by the Holy Spirit to tell my story. And I can point now back to things where I'm like, oh yeah, I just was trying to avoid that voice because I didn't feel worthy. And so I started to this podcast. I started Unfeigned, and I picked the name because feigned means hiding and behind a mask and basically like an imposter. And so I wanted to be the opposite. And so I just thought, well, unfeigned. I don't even know actually that's a real word, but I wanted to be the opposite of hiding because I was never transparent, never vulnerable, never honest. I was hiding everything, and I just wanted to be out there. So I thought, okay, I'll record myself. It's still really raw. It's, you know, but it's my story. And so I put it out there. And honestly, when I started, I prayed and I was like, you know, God, I'm going to do this. I'm going to walk through this door. I felt like he opened it. I'm just going to take a step. Whatever you do with this podcast, that's on you. But if I can just help one person, if there's just even one person that hears my story and is helped, then everything I went through is worth it. And so I started to record and just started telling my story and committed that I would be transparent and vulnerable and open. And people started to just kind of reach out to me, and they would say, you know, people that I knew and people that I didn't know, and they would just say, thank you for sharing that, those kinds of things. And it felt good to know that people were being encouraged, but still, I never thought of it being, I know this sounds funny, but I never thought of it being like an actual thing, like a podcast. And then there were some people that were reaching out and saying, hey, I went through this, and hearing how you healed from it has really helped me. And so then I started to think like, okay, this is what I prayed for. And I still felt like, I'm not, who am I? But I'm just going to keep telling my story. And so as I told my story and people started to reach out and I started to engage with some of the people listening to the podcast, it helped me dive into it, right? It became it went from my story to, oh wait, how can my story help somebody now? And so then I started to really think like, okay, I got through all of these things. Let me really unpack how I did it. And so I just went through that whole, since 2016 and everything I went through. And I just went through and I started writing things down and trying to figure out how to communicate how I broke my addiction and how I healed from my broken relationship. And, you know, I often say now, like, you can have the perfect relationship. And so I know that sounds funny, but I was like, well, how did I get there? How did I get to this mindset? And so this podcast forced me really to say, if I want to help people, I got to figure out how I did it. I know that I did it, and it wasn't hard for me to go back and realize how I did it. But so now it just became, well, shoot, I did this. Let me tell people how I did it. And so that's kind of how the podcast helped deepen my understanding of going from brokenness to healing, because then I'm like, well, oh, how did I do it? I want to share that.
Yeah, fantastic. Where can people find your podcast?
Yeah, so the easiest, the best way is to go to the website, go to my website, and it's unfeigned.org. It's UNFEIGNED, unfeigned.org. I have fun with it. I have fun with the website. It's, I kind of geek out on website type stuff. So I just, I mess around with it, but everything's up there. And there's a button that says check out the podcast. So you can just click that button and that'll take you to Spotify.
Awesome. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we close out?
If I can just leave everyone with, make the choice. If you want to heal, make the choice. And then I'm praying for all of you to understand how important it is what you give your attention to. And whatever you give your attention to, you will become attracted to, and you will end up pursuing that. So make that choice and then start to shift your mindset and realize the power that there is in what you give your attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. For everyone listening, I'm going to put his website, just in case you're still unsure. It'll be in the descriptions, so you're able to reach out and listen to his podcast as well. If anybody is going through some stuff, trauma, just unhealed trauma, or anything you want to reach out about, you can reach out to me at boundbygracepodcast@gmail.com. And you can always go to our website and go to our contact us page at boundbygracepodcast.com. And I can give you resources or people to reach out to if it's not something that I can handle. I really appreciate everyone listening. I appreciate Jay being here and talking about attention, attraction, and pursuit. And you guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you.